Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special webinar entitled Finding Purpose. My name is Tegan Lab, and I'm a sophomore studying information science. I'm also a member of the Blue and Gold Society, which is an undergraduate student organization sponsored by the Pitt Alumni Association, whose members serve as student ambassadors for university programs and events. With that said, I'm so excited to be a part of this event and to have you join us virtually today. The Distinguished Alumni Fellows Award, or the DAF, is the highest honor awarded to alumni by the University of Pittsburgh. Today, we are incredibly fortunate to have 2020 DAF recipient Sundaa Bridgett-Jones and Dean Carissa Slaughterback here with us to celebrate on the topic of finding one's purpose. Sundaa Bridgett-Jones is the Managing Director for the Policy and Coalitions at the Rockefeller Foundation, one of the oldest philanthropic institutions in the United States. Over the course of her career, she has ushered in social change as a representative of the US government in South Africa, Kazakhstan, and Iraq with the United Nations, and through standing up multi-million-dollar investments to improve livelihoods in the United States and over 45 nations in Africa and Central and South Asia. Sundaa began her career as a US Presidential Management Fellow. She was a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and the University of Pittsburgh Board of Trustees. She holds a master's in Public and International Affairs from the University of Pittsburgh and a Bachelor of Science in Foreign Service from Georgetown University. Dean Carissa Slaughterback was named GSPIA's new dean in October of this year. Carissa is an outstanding scholar and leader in urban planning with a focus on environmental and land use planning and policy, public engagement, and sustainability, topics on which she is widely published and for which her research is frequently cited. Carissa earned her PhD in Urban and Regional Planning from Florida State University, as well as a Master of City and Regional Planning from Clemson University, and a Bachelor of Arts degree at Winona State University. I am pleased to now turn over the program to our two guests.
Thanks so much, Tegan.
Thank you, Tegan, and thank you to all who are attending virtually today. And Sundaa, congratulations on this fantastic award. I'm honored to be here today and to have this conversation with you about finding one's purpose. So we'll dive right in.
Carissa. Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to be here and to have this conversation with you. I just wanted to start by, if you don't mind, just also congratulating David Frederick, who is the other Distinguished Alumni Fellow. He had his conversation yesterday, and I had the pleasure of watching it and thought that this is terrific that he and I could represent the university in this way. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sundaa, and congrats. This is such an important award, and I've only been with GSPIA a few weeks, but I just know your impact on the school, on the university, and in your broader career has been just truly amazing. So I'm super, super excited to be here. So I'll dive right in, and I'm really excited to chat about purpose. So you asked to speak today about finding purpose in your life, in your career, and I'm wondering if you can begin by just sharing your process for finding purpose.
Well, you know, I've been thinking about this since we've started having the conversations in preparation for this great honor, and I wish I could say that there is a clear process for everyone. I think that this is certainly one of the most important things that one can do, in my view, in life after really considering and moving aside all the distractions and really reflecting on oneself. And so the way that I think about purpose is how one lives out the truest sense of themselves. So how I live out the truest sense of myself. And I can recall being on a path that my mother set for me some 25 plus years ago when I started off in a high school in Philadelphia for international affairs, a special one. And my eyes were wide open to all these wonderful things about different cultures and people and languages and the politics around it all. And that set the groundwork for what I'm doing today, which I think is just so phenomenal. But since then, which was a long time ago, and I've had generally a relatively straight path in my career on international development. It wasn't until actually 4 years ago where there was a huge disruption in my life, where I lost my mother. And that was a moment where all of the things that I had done in years previous, the lessons, the opportunities came together for me to realize that my real purpose for being here was really about how to really support people in living their own truth. And over the years, I had been doing that, although I had not necessarily identified it as my quote unquote purpose. I've had many conversations with people about what their calling is, and of course, knowing people in the faith community who are deeply rooted in this kind of thing. But I have to say that for me, and I think the journey is different for each person, it was a huge shock in my life that made me stop and just think about all of what I had been, taught, the kind of paths that had been set out for me, what I had taken advantage of to come to this point of really being someone who's focused on, kind of the humility, empathy, and respect for people, all people, and ensuring that people feel that they have that their rights, that they have the agency, and that they have rights in the world, and that they matter in the world. And that has really been my guiding star, I think, in terms of kind of my, how I've come to understand what my purpose is in life. But I just want to say, I don't think it's the straight path for everyone. Everyone's journey isn't the same. I guess I will say that once we are able to really kind of get rid of the distractions in our life and reflect deeply on, what it is that that we really feel committed to doing, then that helps one come to their own purpose.
I love that, supporting people in living their own truth. I know one of the ways that that your purpose has played out in your career is a focus on inclusion and justice and support for marginalized voices. I know that you've worked on this both professionally and personally. In your introduction video that we have on the Rockefeller Foundation's website, you highlight these things. So as you think about your purpose, how did you come to understand these issues: inclusion, justice, support, empathy, humility, all of those pieces you just talked about? How did you understand them as being at the core of who you are and how you work?
Well, a lot of it, Carissa, and I hate to keep going back to childhood because so much of our lives, right, are really about that. But a lot of it was really about me watching my mother, a single parent, taking care of 4 children, not being college educated, but very much rooted in deeply in the importance of education. She was the ultimate entrepreneur. She had a daycare center that was in our home for many years. And she decided that she wanted to have a 24-hour daycare center. So she made that happen for people who, have to work 24-hour shifts, and for there to be someone there to take care of their children. And just watching her process as a Black woman in Philadelphia, I grew up in West Philadelphia, in that area, really struggling to get to certain milestones. I could see what was stacked up against her. And so when I went out to work in the world and be supportive of either in my community or globally of development programs, et cetera, I could recognize those roadblocks. I recognized those obstacles. I recognized discrimination. I recognized sexism. I could recognize, misogyny, a few other things. And I think that is what actually fueled me, and to know that this can be overcome. I've seen it overcome in my own personal life with personal experience, but I've also seen so many people around the world who overcome various obstacles in their life. And I think even in the moment that we're living in now, where we see kind of the inequities and the racial reckoning that's happening in the US, that is for many fueling people to get out and speak out against those things. And it was the whole process and opportunity to help create that demand for change that I got very much engaged in my early parts of the career when I started with the U.S. Agency for International Development. And I led a lot of democracy work, as they called it at the time, where we were right there soon after the historic election in 1994 of President Nelson Mandela. And there were people who were ready to, mobilize and start to execute on his great vision for equality for all and figure out what that meant for all the citizens. There are many other examples of that, but that's what really excited me about this work. And that's when I knew that this was at the core of what I wanted to do. I love the feeling of people realizing that they are the change, that we are the change, and that we can actually do something about the situations in most cases that we're in. So that's part of the excitement of it.
Yeah, it's clear that the work that you do is very personal. It's informed by your personal experiences. It's an expression of who you are. And one of the questions that came up, we checked in with our students in the Graduate School of Public and International Affairs about things they would love to ask you as a certainly distinguished alum. And one thing they asked about is this work ever emotionally taxing? And how do you work through that? What keeps you motivated through all of the hard work, hard times, challenges that pop up personally or professionally?
That's a really, really great question. And the answer to it, the simple answer to it is yes, it's very taxing, particularly for people who do empathize and who do feel the pain and the struggle, but who also see the opportunity and be willing to look forward. Just as a short story, when I started at the U.S. Agency for International Development in 1995, soon thereafter, I had a chance to have a tour overseas. And my choice was, would I like to go to Rwanda or would I like to go to Kazakhstan? And at that time, Rwanda had just come out of that horrific, tragic genocide. And emotionally, I kept saying to myself, I just wonder how could I actually thrive and be of support to people on the ground in that context? And I was really quite nervous about that. And I decided to go to Kazakhstan at that moment, and not because I thought it would be that much easier. We're talking about a different environment. While there wasn't a genocide, there certainly had its own challenges, particularly with a more top-down government, authoritarian government, and other issues there. But that's at a moment where you feel, am I really ready? And that was 1998. But just as a recent example, when my colleagues and I have been working tirelessly over the past 6 to 8 months to really set up and be supportive of a COVID recovery here in the US and around the world, and thinking about the number of people, some of whom are in my friend circle who have died from COVID. I mean, these moments, and I think about the progress that has been lost. I think the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation produces something called the Goalkeepers Report. And the progress and the gains that have been made over the 25 years in terms of people being able to improve their livelihoods have been washed away in 25 weeks. And so these are the kinds of things I think we carry with us as we think about it. But I use it as an opportunity to fuel that energy and the ambition and the commitment to be supportive of the change that many communities are trying to drive.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I think following on a bit of discussion on COVID-19 and some of the inequitable impacts that we're seeing across the world, you've done a lot of work at the Rockefeller Foundation that's focused on gender equity, and in particular, the burden that's been carried by women of color in the US and more broadly. And you wrote recently about some of the gendered impacts of COVID-19 and called for greater solidarity in the women's movement as a remedy for that and as an action that we should be taking. How do you ensure on this particular topic that marginalized voices are represented in this movement, which is so well established, but hasn't maybe evolved to the extent that it could? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I've been really struck over these past months and just listening to the news and reading the research and having conversations with people who are leading women's movements and other efforts on the front lines, and understanding kind of the enormity of the situation. You know, when we look at how so many women are on the front lines of this, either as health workers, essential workers, et cetera, but to also know that, you know, women who make up 30% of the paid labor force globally have also been at the brunt of losing their jobs, 54%. And that has been, you know, not only that, but also their vulnerability to domestic abuse, for example, being at home, not being in the workplace, also being primary caregivers. It really does bring to light the need to ensure that those voices that have not been heard are at the table. And so one of the things that I think has been so fundamental to any work that anyone can do, no matter it's, you know, whether it's domestic or global, is let us have conversations with the people that we're trying to help. Let us bring those voices to the table to share where they feel there are obstacles, to share where their solutions and ideas for change, and most importantly, to involve them in that change. I think so many efforts tend to be more extractive than not, kind of taking intelligence and data, having another group, you know, kind of pull together what the solution might be, and then executing on that solution. And I think that's a change that needs to happen. You know, no matter where we are, whether we're in Pittsburgh at the, you know, Community Engagement Center, where we're listening more to seniors who are involved or others. I can remember, you know, graduate experience is very different from an undergraduate experience. And I am a graduate of the graduate school at Pittsburgh, but I still was able to be engaged by being involved in something called Generations Together, where we had undergraduate students and another graduate student and I kind of led programs where we were bringing students and older populations together to bridge, you know, those gaps and really hear the stories and be supportive of them at their moment in lives. And I think that's what's important. It allows people to see problem spaces differently, and allows them to understand. So let's bring the people that we aim to support to the table for their ideas and thoughts.
Yeah, it certainly brings that mantra of nothing about us without us.
That's right.
And, you know, going back to your point about the demand for change, and that we are the change, and that the we is broader than those of us who are in positions of power and authority and at the table now.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. What's giving you optimism about progress that's happening so far in this space?
Well, my husband Randy and I have a 14-year-old daughter, Sage, and I think she's like first order optimism for me, because I see so much hope and opportunity there. And amongst many young people, I unfortunately can no longer say that I'm part of the younger crowd in my workplace. That was the case for many years, no longer, but the millennials there have such ambition and such courage, and we're seeing it playing out on our TVs at night, and when we see people really calling for change, not only here in the United States, but around the world. And that's what excites me most, to know that, that there are people who are willing to go out. And I guess I want to say that one of the things that I've, over the past few years, and just mentoring a number of colleagues and being mentored by them as well, I think it's a two-way street. particularly the younger ones, is the importance of two things. One is authenticity. Let's show up and be who we are and be unapologetic about that, and know that our contributions to conversations and to movements and to big ideas are so important. But if we are shy about being who we are, then I think that poses an issue. And it took me some time to get to that point too, of just coming in with my full self, my full Philly girl, West Philly girl self, to some of these conversations that are very much otherworldly and with world leaders and others. There's a great appreciation for that authenticity, though. And I think the second thing for me is the courage, is really having courage and courage of our conviction. And I have wonderful stories with my father-in-law where he shares with me. He grew up in Louisiana and Baton Rouge, and he's in his late 80s, and he has all these really great stories of what's like to be a Black man during that time, and thinking about that till now, and all the points of courage along the way that he had to show. And so I think authenticity and courage are two really incredible kind of values, I guess you can say, that I believe are important to live by.
Nice. Yeah. So thinking back to your time as a West Philly girl arriving at the University of Pittsburgh and Gispia, thinking about that time, what helped you find and hone your purpose through those experiences you had as a student?
I came to University of Pittsburgh, Gispia, right after undergrad. And as Tegan said, I went to Georgetown School of Foreign Service undergrad. And because I kept saying to myself, I want to be in the Foreign Service, and I'd love to have these experiences, et cetera. And so that was a great, great training ground for it. But when I came to Gispia directly after, I did so in part because on my mother's side, I'm first generation to go to college. And I said, I don't want to wait to get the graduate degree. Let me just go now and try to get this going. But what I wanted from that experience was not only a deeper understanding, I think, from a more let's say, academic, technical side around what it meant to be in foreign affairs, what it meant to do work around international development. But I also wanted to have those leadership qualities and the ability to work with others. And I was probably one of the youngest ones in my class, because I believe I was there with a diverse group of graduate students from all across the world coming together to have this shared experience and learning together. And it was really at Gispia that I honed in on the leadership piece and what it meant to really kind of step out and step into, I think, my role as an emerging leader, as a growing leader, as a learning leader, as a servant leader. In the work. And there were so many occasions where I was able to do that, but I want to share one, which is when Gispia really allows me to have this amazing between summer, 2 years in the summer, experience working with the late Ambassador Joe Wilson, who was the US ambassador to Gabon at the time. And I was able, because of Gispia and their support of me during that summer, to go out and spend the summer working at the U.S. Embassy in Libreville, Gabon, and be right by the ambassador's side through meetings with ministers and with heads of state like President Bongo, who was president at the time, to gain a sense from him. And for many people who may read about Joseph Wilson, he passed not too long ago, but his wife was outed as a CIA agent at one time, and he was a very fervent advocate for government service and for public service, generally speaking, and for democratic ways of working. And I feel that experiences like that are so unique. And I was just so, I feel so blessed and fortunate to have had that experience. And it was because of Gispia that I had an experience like that.
Wow, that's fantastic. What an amazing opportunity. That's great. And certainly took courage in the way that you talked about as someone new to graduate education and in this new place and to venture out. That's fantastic. If you could go back and tell yourself anything while you were at Gispia, what would you say based on what you know now, the experiences you've had?
Yeah, I guess what I would say is kind of going on the theme of purpose is that, we go through our educational experiences seemingly with one track in mind, and that is, how do we get a good job and be able to take care of ourselves later? But I really wish I would have told myself that what I'm learning at Gispia and at University of Pittsburgh is how to appreciate lifelong learning. How to really embrace it as, part of who I am, and that my journey for purpose is not always through my professional experiences. I think we can find purpose in a number of different ways, not just in our careers. So I would have told myself to think of this, these are skill sets, these are relationships, these are perspectives and points of view that will be important for me as a person, as a human being, as a person though with great intention to contribute to societal change for good, of course, but that universities are bastions of excellence to be able to shape, who we are as people and to contribute to our society. So that's what I would have told myself.
That's great. Do you have a particular favorite memory from your time at Pitt, whether related to education or personal or anything that stands out? Of course, going to Gabon is pretty amazing. So you may have already said it, but maybe there's something else.
Gabon was pretty amazing. Having, I also remember wonderful times with faculty and staff at Gispia who interviewed me to be a part of the Presidential Management Fellow Program. But I think my favorite memory might be when I first met my husband, Randy, who is a Gispia grad, a year ahead of me, 94. And we were at a reception, maybe my first couple of weeks at Gispia, and this really nice and handsome, if I might say, and maybe looked a bit nerdy guy who was like really shy and coming up and saying hello. But little did I know that I'd be married to him 10 years, like nearly 10 years after graduation. We were totally platonic friends, but it was, it's that memory that really helps, it really draws me back to campus and to be able to serve on the Board of Visitors for Gispia and also as a trustee of the university. I have, even though we were just friends and hanging out and all that with other people, it was just really nice to know that we started there.
Wow, thank you for sharing that personal connection that you have to the campus too. It's really great. I wonder if you can share, you talked a little bit about your educational experience, things that were important in the classroom, but also things that happened outside. As you think about educators, faculty or others who might be listening in today, what advice do you have for them about how to best support students in finding their purpose, thinking about purpose, honing it, and refining it?
I think there are a couple of things I'll say. One is the importance of really understanding what it means to be mentored and to be to be in that mentor-mentee relationship. And when I look back, I think a lot of what I understood about mentorship actually came from my engagement with my professors. And you're building out a friendship in addition to obviously, gaining that exchange of advice and counsel in terms of ways to move forward. And I feel like that's such an important piece when we're first starting in our journeys after Gispia, is to understand what it means to be in a mentorship relationship. And here again, it's not one way. We shouldn't, as students, only look to faculty for what they can give us, but rather how we can have this, kind of exchange and shared views and perspective on things. So that's one thing that I would note. And I think the other thing too is one of the things that has stayed with me, and we often at Gispia, for those of us who were there 25 plus years ago, reference a dear professor, Donald Goldstein, who everyone knows with his yellow sweater. He wore a yellow sweater for all his lectures. But he set a way of framing, a way of thinking, a way of analyzing problems and issues, and of seeing the world that I now understand to be systems thinking, but was not presented in that way, that really allowed me to have a greater sense and appreciation for the intersectionality of our lives and the way of working, and the nexus between different issues, health and, energy and nutrition and kind of livelihoods and jobs, and how these things come together and how we should be thinking of them. And so for faculty, those kinds of frameworks, being able to share them can be really ingrained in us, and we can take them forward as a way to think about the problems that we're facing, whether they're at the office or even at home.
Great, thank you. I wish that I could talk to you all day, and I just feel so fortunate to be able to get to know you a bit through this conversation, and I hope we'll get to chat a lot more over the years. It is time, though, to turn it over for a few questions from the audience. So I'll close by saying congratulations again. I'm inspired by you and your work, and learned a lot from this conversation about you. And certainly it's making me reflect on my purpose, and I'm excited to continue thinking through that. So thanks for all of the inspiration. So I am pleased to welcome Alexandra from the Pitt Alumni Association to lead the next Q&A. Welcome.
Hi, Alexandra.
Thanks.
Hi, Sunday. Thank you, Dean Slaughterback. I'm Alexandra Waltmeyer. I'm the Director of Campus Constituent Relations, and I am going to ask some questions from the chat, or I'm sorry, from the Q&A. So if there are any others, please feel free to put them into the Q&A, which is found on the bottom menu there, and we'll get to whatever we can this afternoon. So first, we have a question from Evelyn McGill. She said, because of the pandemic and its adverse effect, how do you continue to push through and make a difference and remain positive? And I think we heard a little bit about your daughter and how she gives you hope. Could you maybe speak a little bit on professionally, how you continue that work forward and continue staying focused and engaged there?
I want to share that when we first started quarantine, I guess in March, but a few weeks after that, we had a psychologist come virtually to our workspace and guide us through a number of things that really centered around self-care. And I think that's so fundamental for us, not only in times like this, but in all times, of really taking the time to step back and to say no, and to learn how to say no, because that's not easy. And I'm one of them. I'm a utility infielder. I'm always in saying, okay, I can help, I can do that. But for us to really take that time to step back and care for ourselves, I think I don't want it to be, a cliche, but if we don't do that, we're not going to be here for others. And as I mentioned, I think when I think about the impact of the pandemic and all of our communities, particularly in the Black community, I find it really striking when I talk to colleagues, some of whom may not be people of color, And I will say I've lost 10 people in my life over the past few months, and they'd be so shocked about that. That's not their experience, and it just shows us some of the really tragic impacts it's having in some communities and not others. This is impacting all of us for sure. But the losses that we are seeing in certain communities are just so devastating. And so we have to care for ourselves. We have to live for the moment, and in order for us to really be prepared for rolling up sleeves.
Yes, absolutely.
I must say, Alexandra, that I'm saying that, and I was doing really well with working out and tennis and everything, but these past couple of weeks, I've been slipping off a little bit, so I'm gonna heed my own words and make sure.
Yeah, I think that we've all kind of now like cycled through new habits, and they've increased and decreased. I totally feel that for myself and my family as well. So absolutely. We have a question from Kevin Kearns, who is a Gispia faculty, and he asks, what leadership skill has been the most valuable to you, and what leadership skills are you still trying to improve?
First of all, Kevin Kearns is one of my favorite professors. And he's just so amazing. There's so many amazing faculty at the Graduate School for Public and International Affairs. And I feel just so incredibly honored to represent the school in this way and to get to know many of the faculty members over the past 2 years. I would say, empathy is such an incredible part of what it means, in my view, to be a leader. That we can at least sit and see some issue or perspective from another person's viewpoint. And as I mentioned before, for me, fundamental to doing that is really being able to sit and listen and find ways to identify, even though it may not be your own experience. I think empathizing is really, really important, and one that I think that I do fairly well just because of my lived experience. What I would love to work more on is leaders must also really effectively communicate what a vision is for what the future will be. And that's the piece that I would really like to spend more time working on, is that ability to be able to really be compelling for people with evidence, with passion, with bringing these new voices to the table for the conversation, to be able to say, this is what it looks like now, but this is what I think it should look like, or where we should be going together. And I welcome Professor Kearns and other people's advice on how best to do that.
I'll just add in, I loved how you talked about being a servant leader, but also a learning leader. And I think we hear a lot about servant leaders, but that learning process, I think it just emphasizes that it's active, it's lifelong, it's about being present and showing up and leading in that particular way. So I was jotting down a few notes and I wanted to get the words right, but that really stuck out to me. Yeah. I loved hearing it.
I've had some really, really good lessons from leaders. One I would just like to share quickly is from Kofi Annan, who was the Secretary General at the United Nations, and he passed a couple of years ago. I saw him just a few months before he passed, as we were coming together to have a conversation around state fragility. But I'm trying to remember what years it was. I can't remember the year, so I won't try to dig on that. But I was at the UN, and he went out for a visit to see the devastation after an earthquake in Kashmir. And I went along with him, and I was his note taker. So I was the person, I was a political officer, but in effect, I was really a note taker, right? And I'm in with him in all of his meetings. And I was with him when he met with then President Musharraf, and to talk about this devastation, how many people's lives were lost. I was with him when he was, when we went to Tunisia to unveil what was then the one-child laptop. And on the margins of that, he met with, I think, probably about a good 35 to 40 leaders. And I saw him in action in a way that I think very few people had the ability to. And the way that he listened, the way that he connected, how he asked about family, how he, engaged, and how he used all of that, that trust and confidence that he built in those relationships to actually move the needle on important global matters of the UN, I think was so important. And so I feel very privileged to have had that chance to see someone like that of his stature and ilk in action.
Wonderful, thank you. So you spoke a little bit about the importance and power of saying no. Can you speak a little bit about how you know when to say no and when to say yes?
So this one is a tricky one for certain different things. I mean, I think before I was married and had children, I very rarely said no. I very rarely said no. I was ambitious, but not in a way that was, kind of outwardly so, like, totally self-confidence. But I felt a good deal of ambition, because the ambition came from really wanting to make a difference. I had a former boss while I was with the Obama administration at the State Department who would always say, "I'm not trying to make a point, I'm trying to make a difference here." And I think for me, I've always wanted to be in the room and be able to have those experiences. And I think that's important. A colleague of mine, we often talk about three things, and that is, the visibility that you have, the proximity that you have, and the perception that people have of you. And being in the room and being involved in those conversations, I think, are really important, but not at the expense of things that fuel you and your, who you are, and the love and care. And that's a hard lesson that some of us learn is we underinvest sometimes in families and people who we love, and we overinvest in our careers and other things. And so I think we need to flip that and learn how to say no more. And so when Sage came along, that's when I learned how to say no, and I'm pretty good at it now. When I feel like it's crossing the lines, and I've had to learn the hard way, unfortunately. But those are just a few thoughts on that.
This is one of those areas where I think actually pandemic life might make our work world as parents a little easier in the future, because I think we've all taken a look at what is really important, and is it always, a 10-hour work day. And I know as a mother of a younger child, I definitely appreciate you hearing that and reflecting that. So thank you. Let me see here. Okay, so we have a question here. What kind of advice would you give to GSBIA students who want to be change makers? Specifically, what kind of characteristics do they need to focus on before they get out into the real world? And I guess what kind of skills can they hone while they're still in their program?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I spoke to some of those things in terms of, I guess here's my thing, practice this, practice gratitude, practice listening, practice adapting. When I joined Rockefeller Foundation, maybe eight years ago, almost 9 years ago, soon after I joined, it was Superstorm Sandy. And, I can remember my mother, Sage, and Randy was away, we were in the basement, just kind of hiding out a little bit after the storm had passed and coming up to see what happened. And, it was also a moment where at the foundation, we were doing a lot of work around resilience and what it meant to not only be a resilient person, but to be in a resilient community, to be in a resilient city, to be in a resilient system. I think obviously the Times now is testing the resilience of the University of Pittsburgh system and dealing with COVID. And a lot of the learning from that was about the cycle of learning and adapting to different situations, being hit with different shocks at different times and being able to bounce back, if you will, or come back even better, and even more, kind of emboldened or ready to move forward. And I think for students, we're not really thinking about those things, right? We're not thinking about being grateful. We want to hear ourselves, or we want to, and the adaptation is not so easy for some people, but these are really important pieces, I think, of fundamental parts of a success, in my view. And I don't, however one might want to define that in terms of their next stage, their next path, etc. And so that's something that I would like to share more and hear more about with current students.
Wonderful. So kind of in the spirit of homecoming, could you speak with us a little bit about why you believe it's important to stay connected to your alma mater?
Yes, that's a really great one. And I love this hashtag Hail from Home. It's just so terrific to see that. And I'm wearing my Pitt colors, and I've been, from Philadelphia, driving across the state to get to Pittsburgh, I felt like being in another state, actually. Sometimes I look around and say, am I still in Pennsylvania? And that's just, the whole Philadelphia-centered way of thinking. But getting out of that, I think it's so important, and this maybe goes to the whole point of showing thanks and showing gratitude, to give back to, the institutions, the people, and others who have, helped us along the way. And University of Pittsburgh and GSPIA have been such a fundamental part of my trajectory, both professionally and personally. And I was disconnected for a few years after graduation, but was so pleased to come back. We have at GSPIA an awesome colleague, Libby Hilf, who's been doing an amazing job engaging alumni to come back. And over these past, I don't know, maybe 6 to 8 years or so, what I find is that excellence that I'm trying to center myself in, I find at Pitt. And whenever I go, I see it. I see it in Professor Kearns. I see it in Professor Kenny. I see it in so many others. And I know that we'll see this as well with Dean Slaughterback. And I see it in my meetings at the trustee level with Chancellor Gallagher and the senior level team, to be every day thinking about how can we make your lives as students at the undergraduate, graduate level, as faculty, staff and others, administration, how can we support your efforts to realize this university aim of excellence in learning? And, if anyone who wants to be centered in that, I think we find that on campuses like Pitt's. And in addition to great and fun relationships that we've built over the years, I think that's what fundamentally brings me back, is that I want to continue to keep my eye on that excellence piece, what it means to be this transformational leader, what it means to be, a servant leader, learning leader, and to take us through times like this. And I find that kind of leadership at University of Pittsburgh.
That's so wonderful. I totally agree. So I'm
I
glad
love
you
the
brought up-
gratitude. Oh, sorry. I love the
go ahead.
gratitude piece, and just the way that, that you continuously think about that and ways that we can all be more conscious of expressing gratitude, feeling gratitude, sharing gratitude, and just the way that it helps to lift other people up and lift up institutions in some cases. And it's really essential. Thank you for reminding us of that.
Yeah.
Okay, and since you brought him up, we actually have a comment and a question from Professor Kenny. So he says, thank you for sharing your stories and insights. Our audience may or may not know the instrumental role that you played on last year's Dean Search Committee at GSBIA that brought Dean Slaughter back here. So I wanted to thank you for all your support during that process. As you know, GSBIA and Pitt more broadly face challenges today. What do you think GSBIA should do in addressing our challenges during this uncertain and stressful time?
Well, that's a great one, Professor Kenny, and I was really, again, honored to be a part of that process to that yielded to the great Dean Slaughterback, and we're so excited about what you plan to do at GSBIA. You know, I not only was a student at GSBIA, I worked for some time at another university, at Princeton University, at the Public and International Affairs School, once called the Woodrow Wilson School. I have a good sense of what it's like to be both a student and also on an administrator side of thinking through policy schools. I chose GSBIA at the time. It was a top 10 school in the country for the work that I was in, and it was, steeped in the issues of our time at that time. And that's what I think is so important for GSBIA now, is let's be in the moment. Let's have the conversations, the research, the analysis, the instruction that allow, our students to address the issues of the moment. How we build fortitude around our democracy, how we, lift up communities and really become engaged in communities, how we think about the impacts of pandemics and other health crises on our livelihoods in the US and around the world. I think that urgency and relevance for the time is really important. That's why I'm so excited about a lot of the work that is being led there. And I would say that's the main thing I think we have to do, and be supportive of policies that allow for more diversity in our schools. And we need that. I don't think we can be successful without having that perspective of having more people of color, particularly Black and Latinx and Indigenous people in our ranks as a school. And so that feels really important to me for the moment and beyond, I should say. Yeah.
Okay, absolutely. Dean Slaughterback, I'm going to move forward to wrap us up here. Is there anything that you wanted to say to Sunday before I do that?
Well, just congratulations again. I was taking notes on all of the things that you were saying, especially in response to the last question. I think you have such an amazing perspective as an alum and as a practitioner in this space, and have, traversed a lot of territory. And I'm just really grateful for any and all insights that you share. So certainly aligning with things that I'm seeing in the school, and especially hopes that I hear from the students who are there now and the students who are thinking about careers in this space. So thank you for centering these areas of focus for us, and I'm excited to get to know you better. Congrats.
Great. Thank you all so much. I'm deeply honored and look forward to being a servant for University of Pittsburgh and for GSBIA. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to kind of start closing us out by sharing a comment from Val Njai. She is the president of the Pitt Alumni Association, and she passed along a message here in the Q&A saying, congratulations on receiving this much deserved prestigious award. I look forward to your presentation today, and you have exceeded my expectations. Hearing about your extraordinary mother makes it easy to understand your commitment and passion. She was amazing, and so are you. So I couldn't miss the opportunity to pass that message along. And again, we at the Pitt Alumni Association want to thank you, Sunday, for joining us here today, and Dean Slaughterback for sharing your time and your talents, for being wonderful representations of the University of Pittsburgh and what our students and alumni are out there doing in the world. For everyone in our virtual audience, please, we hope you will join us tomorrow for an update from Chancellor Patrick Gallagher. That event will begin at 2 p.m. and the information is on our website at homecoming.pitt.edu, where you'll find information about all our other upcoming events, including a virtual concert this evening and a pregame chalk talk to discuss the football game. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you, and hail to Pitt.
Thank you.